Okay, so happy World Book Day. I'm here with Paul McElwee, author of Saving Springton and the Heroes of Winterfell, which are part of the Season Island series.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So, can you explain to us what the two books are about?
Well, the books are about, the first book is about this one. This is about snowflakes and a place called Winterfell. And one's called Chris Crystal, the other one's called Pete Pellet. They're best friends, and they find out that the snowflakes which are sent from Winterfell to Earth aren't getting there. Basically, they're being hijacked along the way, and they also find out that Santa Claus has been hijacked by the same people, who are the storm clouds that live in the Savage Sea, which is just outside Winterfell. So Chris and Pete hatch a plan to go and basically save the snowflakes and save Santa Claus, which happens. But they find after the Savage Storm Clouds attack Winterfell, Chris and Pete find out what's going on, and they go off on a quest to help the snowflakes and to find Santa Claus and get them back in time for Christmas. And this is the second book, The Saving Springton. This is the springtime land of Season Islands. And you've got a brother and sister called Tammy and Terence Chillip, who find out that a spell has been cast, the golden orb of light, which keeps Springton in springtime mode, has been kidnapped, it's been stolen. And so they find out that it's been stolen, and they find out who has it. And both brother and sister go on a quest to restore the golden orb of light for the equinox, because if they don't restore it before the equinox, then Springton will cease to exist, to make sure Springton stays Springton, more or less.
Sounds brilliant. Obviously, you've got different protagonists for both books. Do they cross paths at all during the series?
No, because the Season Islands is set into 4 different lands: Winterfell, Springton, Summer City, and Autumn Falls, which you'll see in the next 2 books. And so they're connected by a bridge, magical bridges, but there's no kind of cross-pollination between characters. However, if there is going to be a 5th book, I may try and bring them all in together, just like Avengers Assemble type of thing, kind of like Infinity War for the Season Islands, if you like.
That sounds brilliant.
I haven't got an idea for it yet, but it's been kind of playing on my mind. If I could do it, how would I do it? But I've kind of got on the other things at the minute, but I may come back to the Season Islands in the future.
Sounds brilliant. Season Island cinematic universe one day.
Yeah. Pretty much. I don't know who the big bad will be, but it may be the storm clouds, it may be something else. That's the good thing about having the imagination for fiction books. You can make up anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So what age are the books for?
Well, I would say anything from about 4 till about 11 or 12. I mean, granted, there's maybe a lot in the books for a 4-year-old to grasp. Obviously, they're just getting to the point where they're reading at the moment. But obviously, it's something. I think they're good stories. They're good, entertaining stories, and there's something for parents to read to the kids as well, which may spark their imagination, and they may want to know more, and basically just give them a good story. I mean, I have a niece and a nephew who are 2 and a half, and my brother is reading Springton to them at the moment. Obviously, they're not kind of au fait of what's going on, but he tells me that they are actually quite enthralled at having stories read to them. And the fact that Uncle Paul actually wrote it, it really helps them. They really love it. And I have 2 nieces in Australia who were the actual catalyst for me writing in the first place. And they have both stories, and they're actually giving it to their schools as well. So Springton and Winterfell has actually hit Australian schools. So I'm pleased to see it's actually gone far, if not worldwide, not yet.
Yeah.
That's the plan for next one.
Still, other side of the world is pretty amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, anything which I think can get the books out there and have them read by people from all over the world, and it can only be a good thing, especially if you're getting it into the hands of children so young.
Mm.
because it'll help them reading. And I think the best thing you can do is give a child a book. I
Mm.
think that's the best physical present you can ever give a child. And you know what they say, start them early.
Yours is fantasy, so obviously it probably wouldn't apply. But obviously I do ask authors quite a lot, like what do they research when they write? So did you do any research into weather at all, or do you just is it all from your imagination?
Well, mostly from my imagination, but in terms of the flowers, I just got different types of flowers because you've got azaleas mentioned in springtime, you've got tulips, you've got roses. So I just wanted to make sure I had all different types of flowers mentioned there, so to
Mm.
give it a wide spread. It's the same with Winterville. Obviously, everybody has this stereotypical view of the five-pointed star of the snowflake,
Mm.
but I find that there are different types of snowflakes. They're all different sizes. Hence, one's called peat pellet because you can get very long, thin snowflakes,
Mm.
and you can also get the generic type of the 5 point star, and you can have blocks like that. So
Mm.
there's a character in there called Column because you can get a column snowflake. So he's like that. So I just basically did that kind of research,
Mm.
and also on the other types of on the books that are coming. There's the Autumn Falls book, which should be out this year, hopefully. I've done research on different types of trees
Mm.
and the different types of leaves and their shape, so that can incorporate that throughout the Autumn Falls book, sort of to give each character their own their own personality, their own character, and their own special look.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, it's interesting, even something so fantastical, you're doing some research
Yeah,
that's influencing your writing.
yeah, I think as well it helps the child learn too, because if children are reading it, they may not know about all these different types of flowers, but if they're hearing about these different types of flowers or different types of leaves, different types of trees within the book, it may spark their imagination, or they might spark their interest to find out more about that. So not only does this help entertain the reader, it may also help to educate them and may want to learn more about nature and other aspects.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the thing about reading is, expanding the child's vocabulary.
Yeah, I think actually that's something that my brother has actually said to me about Wonderful. There's a lot of things in there that he says that even he can't get his tongue around. I mean, for instance, there's a main square in Wonderville called Saturnalia Square. I took that from the old name for winter, Saturnalia, the
Ah.
festival. He says that might be a bit, obviously, I agree. I think now in hindsight, I agree with him. It might be a bit technical or taxing for a child.
Mm.
Even he finds it hard to get his tongue around the name Saturnalia Square. So, but no, I think if I can bring in things like that from old mythical times, from folklore, as I say,
Mm.
that's like the old name for the Midwinter Festival. It'll help kind of expand the child's vocabulary, expand knowledge, and hopefully give them the impetus to learn a bit more about these subjects.
So, I don't know, do you go into schools as well, or do you just, in terms of feedback from children, is it just, your nieces and things?
Well, I've got a lot of friends who've got kids, and whenever I was writing both books,
Mm.
I actually sent off a rough draft to the friends. I said, right, let your children read this, give me their feedback, tell them I want to know what they think, because at the end of the day, it's for the children.
Mm.
And that was very helpful. I've had friends in America, I've had friends in Australia, I've had friends in Germany, all whose children have read the books, and even back here, even here in Strabane in Ireland, they have all read the books, and I've taken their feedback on board, and it's helped me make the story better. Well,
Mm.
hopefully make the story better, but I've basically took their ideas because that's what they want to hear and that's what they want to know about. And I think that that's certainly one of the primary things. Whenever you're writing, know your audience and make sure take the feedback on board.
Yeah, absolutely. So, are you working on the sequel at the moment?
Well, I have both manuscripts for Summer City and Autumn Falls. and with Kevin at the moment. Yes, and well, thankfully lockdown last year was a big help with that because I wasn't working. I had a lot of time on my hands, so I was able to get them done and get them finessed up to the standard that I think they're an acceptable standard. I've had feedback from Nikki, so we worked on both of them throughout the year. We're at a place where we're both very happy with them at the moment. So it's just basically onto the design stage for both of them, and hopefully they'll be out this year. They were meant to be out last year, but obviously with COVID, millions of other things were out the world. But we're back on track this year, hopefully. Touch wood.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking with Colin about it earlier, and we were saying, and on one hand, a lot of people have been writing more. He's written 3 books during lockdown, and then on the other hand, there are some people who, because they're not, going out into the world, going to work, being around nature, then their inspiration is drying up.
Yeah, I can understand that, because if you're stuck at home all day, you're looking at the same 4 walls. So it can be really difficult for the mental state as well as the imagination. But I find that sometimes, I mean, I'm trying to come up with a new series of books, and luckily I've managed to do it from my basically from my window. I can see. I mean, this is still in the development stage. I'm not sure if I'm going to pursue it, but I'm lucky enough that I can see the tallest structure in Ireland from my window, and
Really?
it's a television mast. So I am trying to incorporate that with local fairy stories and the idea of Irish fairies, because I think that will be a good story. Like, I'm tentatively calling it the Fairies of Coram Hill, because that's where the TV mast is. It's on Coram Hill, and I'm still in the development stage. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it, or indeed if it's going to be worth pursuing. But see, I got that inspiration from my bedroom window. But I can understand why there's a problem, with not going out. But luckily, with things like the internet and what have you, and television, inspiration can come from anywhere, from everywhere. I mean, my inspiration for Wonderful come because I love Christmas. I didn't really need to research any of that, or
Yeah.
I just know that I'm a big child and I love Christmas. And so I thought, right, I want to write something for Christmas I initially wrote it for my nieces. And then I thought, right, I can maybe make that into a book. I can make that into something wider. And that's when the idea of the Season Islands come out of it. Because initially that was just one small insignificant story for 2 children. Hopefully now that whenever we can all get out into the world, it'll help the imagination. Maybe I could come up with about 10 more ideas, and the Fairies of Coram Hill could stay up in Coram Hill for all I know.
Have you finished the book about summer as well? Or?
Yes, both books are with Nikki at the moment, and I actually was speaking with Kevin today about designs for the Summer City and Wonderful. You've got snowflakes, you've got flowers in springtime. I've got leaves in autumn falls. And Summer City is going to be populated by suns. So it's going to be many suns with arms and legs. And we were talking about the design phase today, about how we think they should look. So things are progressing nicely with Summer City.
Brilliant. Do you have any particular influences in terms of writing children's books?
Well, I never really thought about writing children's books, to be honest with you. It was just born out of writing one little story for my nieces. And then the more I wrote on the book, the more I thought that this could go somewhere. And see, the idea of the Season Islands wasn't in the original story. I actually went back and I added all that in after I had finished the story. And from there, it just grew. I thought, right, now that I can make something of this, well, if we're going to have one season, we've got to have all the other 3. And that's when the old grey matter started to kick in and think, right, how could I do this? What would I call them? And in terms of the actual design, I did think about Terry Pratchett. If you know, his Discworlds are set on top of is it 4 giant turtles?
I think it's 4 elephants on the back of a giant turtle, I think.
4 elephants. Yeah, so the idea of, actually I did take a little bit of Pratchett from that. So you've got sort of the 4 elephants. You've got 4 lands, and they're connected by kind of mythical bridges. And in the center of it, you've got the Savage Sea, where that would be like the wasteland. So I did take a wee bit from Pratchett from that. but not a lot.
So are you thinking of sticking to writing for this age group, or you think of writing for other age groups, or?
Well, I've got ideas for other stories, for stories of a more adult nature.
Hmm.
I mean, at the present, I'm actually reading a book on the Irish crown jewels. Basically, it's a true story. They were actually crown jewels. They were like collars, and I think there was a tiara. They were housed in Dublin Castle in 1907. They went missing. They were stolen,
Mm.
and they were never found again. And
Wow.
nobody was ever caught for stealing them. So that's a story that I'm thinking on to incorporate into like a Dublin gangland love hate
Mm.
type thing. So it certainly wouldn't be something for the children.
Yes, it's a fantastic mystery, isn't it?
Yeah, it's as I say, it's something that's never been solved.
Mm.
So that you can play about with it there.
Yeah.
But you've also got to be careful because there were real people involved, and a lot of these real people still have descendants. So you kind of have to be careful with that. But I'll worry about that after I've written the story.
Do you have a favorite book or film about a writer or about writing?
Well, I do. I'm a trained journalist as well, so I do like journalism.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I do like journalism films. So things like All the President's Men and State of Play, all about the idea of journalism and how the machinations. I love all that. But one of my favorites, a film I've loved for a long, long time, is called The Paper. It's written by Ron Howard. Sorry, directed by Ron Howard. And Michael Keaton is in it, and Marissa Tomei is in it. Robert Duvall. Keaton, he's the editor of a New York paper. At the beginning, you see two men get killed, and it's supposedly killed by two African Americans. And it's about the day, about how they go and get the story, but how they figure out if the story is right or if the story is wrong.
Mm.
And in the midst of all this, he's deciding whether to go to the New York Times and the bigger, more prestigious paper. It's a knockabout. It's kind of comedy, thriller, drama, and it's just one of the best films I've ever seen.
Well, that sounds very
It,
interesting.
it really is fun. As I say, you've got Michael Keaton with a Coca-Cola fixation. Randy Quaid's in there. Glenn Close is in there. Robert Duvall, Jill Hennessy. It's just one of those films that you can watch over and over.
So I'm here with Kevin from Crystal Peak, the author of Tridea's Children and Lost Words. Okay, so can you tell us what your two books are about?
So Tridea's Children set in a fantasy world where 5 teenagers, young adults, are chosen pretty much to save the world. Basically, most of them are halflings or elves, and the human race is on this planet, but they are evil. And they've been taken over by some dark power. So instead of saving the world, they've pretty much got to try and save the human race from destroying the world. And they fight amongst each other. It takes a while to get where they are.
Brilliant. And what about Lost Words?
So Lost Words is about a teenage girl who lives alone with her father. She's very reclusive and she loves to read books. She's in the library pretty much every day after school. She finds a book that she reads. It's called Treasure Island. Yeah, she's reading this book aloud, and it pulls her into the book. She ends up on Treasure Island and she travels around, she messes around for a bit. And she gets returned at the end of the first chapter, and she reads it again the next day, and it takes her into a separate area. So it's a completely different place to where she went in the first time. And then she becomes trapped in this world. It's not just in Treasure Island, it's a mixture of pretty much every book out there. And it's got like Peter Pan in it, who's completely evil and eating children. So everyone loves Peter Pan who eats children, don't they? Not the hero they dreamed him to be. But it's got a slight twist to it, so that way all the characters that come into the story, or anyone that's like Peter Pan and stuff like that, who are characters, are also other human beings who have been ripped out of their worlds. They're not actually characters. They've been forced to live a life that's not their own for someone's story. So it's about finding their way home and getting out of this evil darkness that's taken over the world.
What did you do in terms of research for either of your two books? Obviously, I imagine with Lost Words, it was mainly seeing what was in the public domain.
Yeah, for Lost Words, it was pretty much anything that was in public domain, but it meant I'd have to read all the books that I was taking characters from. So each character I took from another book, I would twist into it so that way a part of who they were was in the story. But I twist how they would say things or about the character. I had to study each of their lines so I could build up the character a bit more, so it's more realistic. There was a lot of research for Lost Words. It took a lot of time to just figure out how to get the story along and to build up those characters. For Tridea's children, it wasn't a great deal of research. Not at first. I just plotted out the story and just wrote along. It was after the story was completed where I was building up the world and stuff. That's when I put more research into it, build up the relationship of the characters and the actual world, the building itself. And I've written a second one to it, which isn't going to be published anytime soon until I've written the third one as well.
Okay, so what, apart from, of course, the public domain books involved in Lost Words, and as you think of the main purpose of research is to, even with obviously with speculative fiction and fantasy, is to help the reader visualize it, help the reader get a sense of the fictional world. There's I think it was Peter Cushing, when he was playing Dr. Frankenstein, he decided that if one brain surgeon watched his performance and thought that he didn't make a convincing surgeon, then he would have failed as an actor. So he then went and watched actual brain surgeons, so he would be more convincing.
Well, that's one way to do it, isn't it?
What are your influences for both books? Starting with Tridea.
I suppose most of the influences for Tridea's was because I originally wrote it when I was about 15, the original story. So at that time, it's mostly influences on games that I was playing, like the Final Fantasy games. I wasn't a massive reader at that point. As for Lost Words, my main influence was by Cornelia Funk, who wrote Heart and Inksvale and Ink Death. Games about going into books, and that I thought was a fantastic read. And that's what influenced me to write this one. I've got a couple of ideas to do like a prequel for Lost Words and some other side stories. But again, that'll be a long way down the line, I reckon, before I sit down and actually get on with some more writing.
What are you working on at the moment?
So I've got a couple of different stories in the works. Whether or not I'll get them finished this year, hopefully. So one's fantasy life, about an unlucky thief in this fantasy world who's been betrayed by his friend, almost eaten, almost died a couple of times. So he's left the group that he's with and trying to find a new group. When he joins his new group and they're going on a mission to raid some dungeons and things. But because of he's very unlucky by nature, so many different things will happen. So he'll get attacked, he'll get trapped in a dungeon, collapse. I've thought of so many different ways punish him. And another one is Into the Darkness, which is pretty much about a hidden world running alongside our own world, where it plays about the shadows that are in our world, like human shadows or shadows of buildings. There's creatures within them, and there's a mixture of different races as well, like elves and gnomes that live under the ground that know about it. So I want to play about that a bit. I'm a couple of chapters in with that one, and we'll see where that goes, because that's an interesting right. For that one, I want to build up more on the characters a bit more. So I'm playing about with character emotions, figuring that out a bit more.
You're mainly going to stick with fantasy then, rather than experimenting with other things?
Well, I like fantasy and young adult. I stick with fantasy, but do subgenres of it later down the line. But I think fantasy is one of my main areas that I'm happy with. So I reckon I'll just stay with that genre.
Do you have any advice for anyone interested in writing or publishing?
Writing wise, I'd say just get a story down. Focus, just keep going with it. If you get to a point where you can't figure out what to do, but you know where it's going, stop, put like a sentence there to say, I'll come back to this, and then go straight on to the next bit. Because that way you're in the flow already, just go straight to it. You can easily figure out the gap in between later on, once you've gotten the rest of the story down. I know a lot of writers, they struggle when they go through it because they're editing at the same time. That's not, I don't prefer that way. I prefer just get the story down, go for it like after and edit through it. It's a lot easier because you've got the main plot inside then. You know where the story is going as well. To me, that makes it a lot easier to only have to edit at the end of it, because then you know where the story is, about your characters and creatures, everything in the world. So it's just easier to fill it up a bit more.
Yeah. So in terms of go back to getting the story done, do you use any particular system in terms of structuring, like the Blake Snyder beat sheet system or anything, or do you just there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end?
No. Yeah, you got your beginning, middle, and end, as you do with most stories. There's loads of different like ways to plan out a story. For myself, I'm a pantser, I suppose you can say, which doesn't plot it. They just get on and write it. I have no idea where the stories are going half the time. Sometimes I have a vague idea of what I want in the story, and that itself can take a while to get there. As long as it gets to the end goal where I'm ideally hoping for it to go, I'm not that fast. But yeah, I just tend to just write and see what happens. I have no end goal at all. That can just lead to some gibberish in there, but I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just writing it as it goes along and then editing after and tidying up a bit more. So it makes a bit more of a story. In the early drafts, there's quite a lot of stuff that I tend to take out later on. And a lot of it I'll rebuild and rewrite.
Which of your characters do you think is closest to yourself?
I'd probably say it'll be in Tridea's Children, the main character Rush, because I sort of based it off myself as I was writing the story at first. And that was about my teenage years and stuff like that. So working from that point of view. So I'd say that's more closely to myself, and how he develops after the second story, what's going into the third will probably be more towards me as well. And it gets pretty dark for him throughout the second one. So it'll be an interesting read. Definitely, I'd say I'm relating more to him than any of my other characters.
I think especially when you start out, I think people often put a lot of themselves in the protagonist. I mean, they say write what you know. So yeah,
write what you know. It's a lot easier for people, and since I read mostly fantasy, or I'll audio book with fantasy, or read light novels, it really fits into what I write. So sticking with what I know is better. I read a couple of science fictions and horrors here and there, but I think fantasy is my main category for now.
Going back to Crystal Peak, obviously you just finished the steampunk competition. Do you have any other ideas for short story competitions yet?
So we've got Steampunk's finished. The winners have been contacted, and that's wrapping up now. I think that's going through the editing stage. So hopefully we should be announcing that one soon. As for the next writers competition, not too sure.
Is Crystal Peak a great place for young volunteers who want to learn more about publishing?
Yeah, it definitely is. As a member of the Independent Guild Association, we get quite a lot of information from other publishers and help from other resources. We like to do the London Book Fair each year. Obviously, we had to miss that last year because everyone knows what a pandemic's going around. Hopefully, we can go to it this year, but I don't know how that's going to go. Nice to get some live events and stuff going again. But yeah, it's always good to have volunteers who like to help out and want to know more about the publishing world, because there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, like with the format and designs and marketing, and reaching out to everyone. Even though we're a small team, volunteers do make a big difference to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. I've got something really useful on my CV now. I've done lots of different things, with social media and contacting different businesses. And yeah, if anyone's out there and they're looking for work and they're wondering what to have on their CV and things, definitely just message us, DM us on Instagram or whatever. I'm Anushka, and I'm here with Samantha Fitzgibbons, and we're here to talk about her book, The Happy State. Is that right?
That's correct.
So, what is your novel about?
It's a dystopian novel set in the not too distant future, so around sort of 2026. I'm still in the final stages, so unless I get a move on, it could end up being later. But no, it's set in 2026, and the United Kingdom has revolutionised and become independent. Civil war has broken out as a sort of precursor to the story, so that's previously happened. And martial law has been declared by a commander-in-chief, and he's a dangerous authoritarian figure with very sort of extreme ideologies. He in turn appoints a leader of the UK, which obviously is now independent, and together they announce that the UK is to be known as the happy state, whereby it's a state that will sort of endeavour to put the well-being of its people over and above all other agendas. During this transition, curfews are in place, strict curfews. Any sort of entertainment is stripped back. They've got these specific television channels that they have to watch. It's all about being happy, being calm, being relaxed, creating happiness. But obviously there's a huge twist to this. We've got a lead character. She's the protagonist. She's a 23-year-old girl. Her father, she cares for him, and he has vascular dementia. So she's fiercely protective of him anyway. But when she learns that there's a greater agenda, and what they're actually trying to do, the government, is effectively wipe out mental illness, and their version of creating happiness is to wipe that out and create a purist race, as it were. So obviously her father is going to be in danger, and they're taking people that have got any sort of marks on their medical records of any sort of previous mental illness. They're taking them to zones whereby this is where it becomes like this sort of final solution, Holocaust-like. There aren't any gas chambers, but it's a very similar concept in that they're sort of eradicating these people. We have a resistance group called Freedom who are fighting to oppose it. So, all of these things kind of come together, and it's whether they can overcome what the government are trying to do. That's essentially the story. So there's lots of twists and turns to it, a lot of corruption.
So what research did you do in preparation for your novel?
Oh, I did tons of research. I mean, I've been thinking about this book for probably 7 years, which is a long time. I actually started it about 7 years ago. At the time, I was doing a psychology degree. So I had this interest anyway in human behaviour and the way the mind works. I then went on to do a master's in crime and terrorism. So that sort of added another layer to it. I started learning about crimes of the powerful. I started learning about state terrorism and how that's deemed to be quite acceptable because it's from a state as opposed to a sort of lone actor or a cell, a terrorist, as it were. So that was very interesting in itself. And then I became quite interested in reading about places like Vanuatu. I never know if I pronounced that correctly. I think it's Vanuatu. It's the happiest place in the world, and that became quite interesting. I then recall that David Cameron in around 2010, he said something about he wanted the general well-being of his population, of the people of England to be taken into consideration over and above GDP. And I remember just sort of thinking that's really interesting. And then I sort of started reading about the Holocaust, and when you sort of combine all of these things, on the one hand, you're looking to create this happy state where your people, they're trying to overcome their desire for, material possessions. And on the other hand, you've got this state terrorism, which is okay because it's a state. And then you've got things like the Holocaust, which obviously was the most hideous thing, one of the most hideous things that's ever happened. So, I started reading into all of these different things, and before you know it, you've just got this really absurd amalgamation of things going on, and they sort of just came together, I suppose. The concept of a happy state, but with a different version of happy. We all have different versions of happiness, of course, but I don't think many of us would deem anything barbaric to be particularly happy. But there's people out there that seem to think that that's how to create a purist race. It's so yeah. My research covered all of that, and I think because I was studying, that brought it to the fore because I was looking into it at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Having already studied the subject must mean you already had a good knowledge of it going into the project.
I think so, yeah.
My next question is kind of similar. Was your version of the UK inspired by any real life political situations? Obviously, you already discussed some of them, but were there any others?
Yes, of course. But interestingly, I'd already got this idea. I'd already had this idea for sort of several years. But what I will say is, I'd looked at things. I'd looked at things like the Holocaust, as I said, which is a different country, but of course, that was an integral part of it. However, what was really fascinating was that Brexit happened while I was writing the story. So I kind of saw what I'd already started to create kind of come to life. It was like life imitating art.
Wow.
It was the most bizarre thing, because you suddenly saw these, while Brexit was sort of going on and the votes were taking place, you saw this immense division amongst the people. You saw a rise in resistance groups. You had the Remainers. You had you had those that obviously wanted to leave. And it really created this immense division. You're aware of it, obviously, but it really was a us or them, and that really became part of my story. I'd already started writing it, but it was like, this is just bizarre that it's.
Yeah.
I'm actually seeing it playing out now. Seeing resistance groups that are fighting either way. We want to stay, we want to leave. It was becoming quite brutal. And then COVID, introduced things like martial law in certain countries, curfews, great restrictions on people. So I was actually seeing it all play out, and it was almost like, gosh, all of it was terrible, but at the same time, it was kind of incredible for the story.
Yeah.
It's an awful thing to say, but it was great research in many respects, because I was just seeing it happen in front of me and thinking, crikey, I'm going to be careful what I write about, because I don't want to predict the next thing. So I think I'll just stick to nice stories from now on. But yeah, Brexit and COVID, absolutely. When I started writing the book, everything I was writing about seemed so far-fetched and seemed so very dystopian. At this stage, I'm reading it thinking it doesn't actually seem quite so bizarre.
Yeah,
which is kind of scary.
Yeah, I think that that's always a great thing. Is people always told, you need to find something real, and no matter how fantastical you will, you have to find something real to connect to. Just having that on your doorstep was probably probably a bit of a sort of blessing, but also kind of not.
It was kind of terrifying, if I'm honest. Yeah, it was terrifying. And like I said, now I'm reading my book thinking, well, actually, it's not that bizarre. This stuff could actually potentially happen. Yeah. We never thought we'd see a pandemic. What? Here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. How did current and previous attitudes to mental health influence your book?
That is such an incredibly apt question, because one of the reasons I started my book, I'd already got the ideas based on the stuff we've already talked about. But I went through a phase of having this debilitating anxiety, absolutely debilitating, which is why it features so greatly in the story. And I built up the courage over years of suffering with it. It wasn't, we're not talking about a mental state, fight or flight, a natural nervousness. I'm talking about a generalized anxiety disorder. Every single day, I was waking up, I was terrified of, I don't know what, but I was terrified of something every day. Back then, 20 odd years ago, wasn't talked about. You didn't discuss it with your best friend. The only person that knew about it was my mum, who, God bless her, she soaked up so much of it and was so incredibly supportive. But I remember building up the courage to go and seek professional help. As you know, we've got an incredible health service, wonderful.
Yeah.
But I went for an appointment, and I was told that it was probably a good idea to maybe go for a walk, get a bit of exercise. I already did exercise every single day. I had so much sort of angst. I was, working out hugely to try and sort of, clear my brain. I said, well, I'm doing all of that. And they said, well, you know, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. And I sort of came away scratching my head going, wow, okay, fair enough. Left it for a little while, ended up having to go back. The next time I went back, I was told that I was told to describe my physical symptoms. So I did. I said, right, you know, my head starts to spin. I get clammy palms, I panic. I get this churning in my stomach. And I remember the professional that I was seeing said, are you sure it's not sort of hunger pains or something you're suffering with? Well, I came out completely astounded. And I came home to my husband and I said, do you know what's really weird? I said, it's almost like they're trying to wipe mental health out, treat it like it doesn't exist. He actually said, you know, you should write a book about that. And I went, you know what? Yeah, maybe I should.
Yeah.
And literally that was it. But here we are now, 20 years later, mental health, the difference in answer to the question is immense. We've had this huge shift, haven't we? This movement of come forward, talk about your problems. Men come forward and open up like you never have before. I still think that's going to take some time, but it's happening. So the difference is huge. You know, you can talk about it now. It's a common thing. You know, you say to someone, how are you feeling? Oh, you know, I'm, you know, feeling a bit this, feeling a bit that. Or people talk openly about their mental illness. You know, I have this, I have bipolar, I have, you know, back then it was kind of, don't mention the, you know, don't mention anything of that note because you'll be locked in a tower or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't blame the health service for any of that, because I think genuinely I think they were trying to identify the difference between anxiety as just a state of mind. I'm feeling nervous and I don't know how to deal with it. It's scary for anyone. Kids feel nervous, you know, it's scary. And anxiety as a generalized disorder, I think doctors perhaps back then weren't armed with the appropriate information to know how to move forward. Thankfully, we're getting there. I think we're having a breakthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is a shame. I think if you have a negative experience getting, you know, approaching trying to get some psychological help, if you do have a negative experience, regardless of whether other services are better, that does affect how you know, that makes you anxious about going back again.
Of course it does. Yeah, absolutely. And then it brings on this whole, well, maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe I'm, then it's the whole, it's me, it's there's something wrong with me. And that becomes something completely different, you know, and then you're in this mess and you don't know how to dig out of it. So yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Thank God we're being encouraged to talk about stuff now.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it definitely makes people feel less alone, I think, you know,
Yeah.
knowing that it's something that other people have and other people overcome, you know, I think it probably makes people feel a lot better.
I would agree, especially during COVID times, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Worse than ever. So yeah.
Were there any other works of dystopian fiction that influenced your book?
I think I would have to say on this one, it's probably a classic answer for anyone writing dystopian work, but I would have to say 1984, George Orwell. It says it all, doesn't it? It was one of the first to bring it to the fore about Big Brother watching us and about, you know, being sort of led by this dictator, as it were, you know, us being mere minions that are just agreeable and do what we're told to do. I think that probably set a precedent somewhere. And I've reread the book. It's so fascinating the way you can read the same book several years later and have a completely different take on the whole story, you know. Like I said with my story, years ago, it seemed so bizarre. Big Brother's watching. Wow, that's just so crazy. Here we are in 2021. You look at your phone and suddenly, you Google something. The next thing you're being bombarded with all the same things, aren't you? And it's quite eerie, really. So again, it's not that unusual. So I think George Orwell, I have to say, has played into it. I think he touches on all dystopian work, to be honest. I think he must do. But that aside, I think I would probably be inclined to say it's been more non-fiction. I've done a lot of reading of Holocaust, Sisters of Auschwitz, Tattooist of Auschwitz, terribly tough to read, but gives you a huge insight, and has proved to be extremely helpful.
Remind me a little bit when you're talking about it of I don't know if you've ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender. There's a bit in that with about brainwashing in Ba Sing Se that reminded me a bit of that.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
What are you working on right now?
Well, I'm still working on Happy State. We're in the final stages of Happy State. Just editing, which is a nightmare because you could just go on forever until, you know, at some point you've got to draw the line and say, right, enough, stop editing. But I'm still working on that. I'm also writing a few short stories. I have that many ideas. I just think probably 2% of them will amount to anything because I just get so many ideas. But yeah, I'm thinking of a short story anthology. So that's sort of, you know, going on in the background. But then I plan to go forward with Happy State and do hopefully another couple of, I'd like to make it a trilogy, ideally. I had so much information that you couldn't pack into one book that I thought, let's, you know, throw another couple in. Why not?
Yeah, I think obviously with world building, you know, you end up stumbling upon so many more possibilities. You can't possibly fit in a single book without the book just being exposition.
Exactly. Well, this is the problem. And exposition's the hardest thing, because I started it so many years ago. You look back and you go, oh my God, I've just got, you know, information dumps galore here. So I've had to go through it all and change it. And Nicola at Crystal Peake has just been wonderful in really helping me through that. So I'm just reducing it now. And at some point I will let it go. It's like your baby, first day of school. Oh. Very tough. Yeah.
So those short stories, do they have a particular theme or?
They didn't mean to have, but they're sort of becoming quite dark. I blame all my studies for it. Honestly, I blame all the studies I did. I just think my brain naturally goes that way. When I say dark, I mean, you know, I'm talking the sort of stuff we've talked about. You know, something that's got a bit of an edge to it. I don't seem to write too much flowery, romantic based, you know, work. I tend to go slightly to the darker side. So I think there'll be sort of a mixture of maybe a little bit ghosty, maybe maybe a bit of gang warfare, maybe, you know, a few different. Yeah, I think so. I've got a few ideas. Maybe I'm thinking of one about somebody who's become radicalized and he's battling with the decision, and he's trying to decide which side to take. So yeah, that's an idea. That's an idea.
Well, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah. It's, again, my studies. I chose to do my master's because of my interest in that field. And again, it's all played out so much, hasn't it? Unfortunately. But yeah, I've always quite liked the idea of going into the mind and seeing what really happens to these people when they decide to go out and do what they do. What really happens in their brains to make them think that that's acceptable? You know.
Yeah.
I think it's a far greater process than we could ever possibly imagine.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Samantha. Happy World Book Day, and look forward to reading the book.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you.